Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, a judge has ruled that wolves have not sufficiently recovered for them to be taken off the endangered species list in Idaho. The state has vowed to challenge that decision. Is that the right thing to do? We'll talk with two officials from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game next and take your questions. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. A welcome as well to those of you listening on public radio and the World Wide Web. It's been called a never-ending story, the fight over the reintroduction of gray wolves to Idaho. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service transplanted wolves to Idaho in 1995. In April 2009, nearly 15 years later, the federal government declared the animal recovered in the state and took it off the endangered species list. Advocates for the wolves sued, saying the region as a whole didn't have a proper recovery plan. Meanwhile, Idaho had its first wolf hunting season, with hunters killing 188 of the animals. Just as the state was gearing up for its second hunting season, a federal judge ruled that because Wyoming doesn't have an adequate wolf management plan, the animal could not be delisted in Idaho or Montana. Idaho's officials reacted strongly, with the governor and members of the congressional delegation saying they would challenge the decision. So what's next for wolf management, and what do you think? Here to talk about the issue and take your questions is the director of the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Cal Groen, and Fish and Game Wildlife Manager, Jon Rachael. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
What do you think about the decision to relist wolves as endangered in Idaho, and what do you think should be done from here on Give us a call, toll free, at 1-800-973-9800. Well, first of all, let's go to the new news. I want to thank an employee of our station who just brought this in to me, Ken. Idaho County, which is around Grangeville, has apparently just declared a disaster over wolves. Now, we don't have all the details on that, but I know that you had gotten a heads up that this might happen. What's your take on this? Normally, we hear that disasters are called because of a weather situation, a flood or tornado, things like that. Why would wolves create a disaster in a county?
Well, Marcia, I'm looking for more detail from Idaho County, but elk are very important to that area. You have the Salway part of the Lolo, Elk City, and elk are definitely down. People depend on them. We used to have very liberal cow seasons. We have really curtailed those in the backcountry. And also economics. Hunters bring a lot of money to communities, and hunters are probably down 90% in the Lolo and Salway areas. So maybe that's what they're aiming at. But hunters are a big economic force, and again, a lot of people depend on wildlife for nourishment.
Now, Jon Rachael, can you explain? There is a proposal. You've just finished taking comments on it to have a special hunt in that area around. It's called the Lolo area for wolves. And what's the next step in that?
Well, we have just completed a comment period on a proposal to reduce wolf numbers up in our Lolo elk management zone. This is an opportunity that we're limited to because wolves were relisted, and we cannot address this issue through the sport hunting season that we had intended. So the proposal will be to reduce wolves down to 20 to 30 animals for a few years.
An estimated?
Presently close to 100 wolves.
So quite a significant decline.
Yes, and we have just completed the comment period. We're going through approximately 2,000 comments, evaluating those, and then we will make any necessary modifications to our proposal.
Now, if the bulk of the 2,000 comments are against this proposal, would that change your direction?
No, what we are looking for in the comments is to see if there's some information that we need to reconsider, or anything that we have left out and failed to address. So we're looking at ways to improve the proposal.
And then it's 60 days, and the Fish and Wildlife Service will get back to you on whether you're allowed to do this?
Fish and Wildlife Service has committed to get us an answer back within 60 days of receipt of the proposal, and whether we can proceed with the reductions.
We'll go back to our original topic in just a moment, but that's quite a steep decline, taking estimated 100 wolves down to 20 or 30. Do you anticipate a challenge as we've seen on many of these issues
Well,
on doing that?
Yeah, let me respond to the Lolo, because I was regional supervisor for 10 years. We used to have 16,000 elk in this 2,200 mile area. That was 8 elk per square mile. We had a difficult winter. We started dealing with the habitat, the other predators, bears, lions, and we greatly reduced hunters, and that herd started recovering. We thought we could support 5. Right now we're only 1 elk per square mile instead of 8. 16,000 to 2,000, that's the steep decline. And it's still going down 14 to 16% a year, and wolves are the primary factor. 90% of the cows are taken by predation. So you look at that right now, the alarming thing is spike elk. All hunters can get is bull and spike elk. Our last count, we had a count in 2006, we had 385 spike elk. Last year, 24. That's 1 spike elk per 100 miles. That is not right. It's way out of whack. There's some major issues. So the steep decline has been in the elk.
But nevertheless, you expect a challenge from taking...
Well, that's typical. I think we've seen a whole parade of challenges. So anything we try to proactive manage, we get challenges. But we're just going to try to do what's right for wildlife and manage them in a common sense and practical way.
Well, let's talk about the recent court ruling that we opened up the show with, and this was the court ruling from Judge Donald Malloy regarding the wolves on the endangered species list. He ruled that because Wyoming did not have an adequate plan, wolves in Idaho and Montana could not be on the endangered species list. And this is from his ruling. He said the Endangered Species Act does not allow the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to list only part of a species as endangered. Accordingly, the rule delisting the gray wolf must be set aside because though it may be a pragmatic solution to a difficult biological issue, it is not a legal one. Your response, basically he's saying you can't break up.
Yeah. Well, first of all, everybody agrees that wolves are biologically recovered. We're 5 times over, so everybody agrees.
Everybody wouldn't agree or they wouldn't be suing.
Well, just about everybody.
Well,
just about.
Quite some large groups and many people who email don't believe that.
Well, anyway, they're biologically recovered well past the goal. The second thing is we had a very orderly season. I think it went very well. So we're talking about a legal technicality here, that Wyoming has to be a part of this. Now, if we would have 5,000 wolves in the state, what would happen then? So we have an issue with Wyoming there.
The judge
so
is not saying it's a legal technicality. He's saying under the Endangered Species Act and distinct population segments, you cannot break up this area and say because they're recovered in Idaho and Montana but not in Wyoming. He's definitely not saying it's a legal technicality.
Well, I think it is because biologically, the Fish and Wildlife Service said that we did a very good job biologically. The rule failed, the system failed. That's from the Fish and Wildlife Service. It failed. You look at a distinct population, we have 60, 70,000 wolves from the Arctic to Utah. Tremendous populations. We have a state there that does not want to get involved. So what's our future then? What's our future? Where's the common sense here?
Well, what can you do with Wyoming?
Well, we've encouraged them. Some say the path is through Wyoming, but Wyoming's a sovereign state, and they've made it very clear. They're very satisfied where they're at.
You know, we're taking a look at a map now of the different populations of wolves, and there's that cluster in Wyoming there. And, you know, Wyoming, the federal government kills many, many wolves in Wyoming. You can see they're in one spot, but they're not dispersed the way they are in Idaho. And, you know, advocates point out that clearly shows that they are not recovered because so many of them are being killed in that state. And therefore, until Wyoming either has a management plan or some other accommodation happens, wolves will stay on the endangered species list in this state. Is that correct?
That's the interpretation this judge has, and it will be appealed because that gives us a pretty bleak outlook. And also, I think a lot of people, there's also a legislative approach that a lot of congressmen did not expect the Endangered Species Act to behave this way with a recovered, you know, a very healthy species. So there'll be a lot of, what's the issue here? Do we litigate? Do we legislate? Do we negotiate? There'll be a lot of discussion in all 3 of those areas.
Well, let's talk about that. Litigation, the Fish and Game Commission has said, go ahead, we want to appeal this decision. Is that right?
That's right.
And you're waiting to hear whether even the U.S. Department of Interior might appeal it.
Right.
The other legislation you mentioned is perhaps having legislation in Congress to authorize a hunt even though the animals are still listed?
Or even declare, you know, that they're recovered. that, you know, that they would accept the 2009 Fish and Wildlife Service rule. The rule is good. The Fish and Wildlife Service, we met all the criteria. We played fair. We have a good plan.
And then the third would be, as you say, negotiate, sit down at the table.
And that's one we're reluctant to do because we've had so many broken promises. We recognize when wolves are brought in the state, we discussed it, and it was said, okay, they're brought in, that's before my time, but if there's an adverse impact you can manage, that hasn't happened. Then we've seen the change in the goal line, 100, 150. People are talking 2,000, and our elk herds can't take that. So there's been a change in the process, and I think that's where a lot of frustration is.
So you're saying you wouldn't be willing to sit down and maybe, you know, Mike Clark from the Greater Yellowstone Coalition says, hey, why don't we all sit down and cap the numbers where they are now, have a discussion with the advocates, come up with a solution that's Idaho-based or Idaho and Montana-based, and move forward out of the courtroom?
We have been sitting down every step of the way. There has been a lot of sitting down and discussion. We think we have a good plan. The commission says we have a management goal of 518, and it just keeps on changing, the whole scope of the thing, and that's a frustration. The goalposts are always changing.
Before we, I have a graphic I want to put up in just a moment, but you know, I've gotten a number of emails on this, as you might imagine, and there's a tenor from a lot of them that just says, you know, why do you keep appealing this? What's wrong with the wolves being put back on the endangered species list? Why would you want to let them alone, basically? Let them be.
Well, we've been dealing with the frustration with increasing wolf numbers and the increasing impacts on our core elk population. But just as the wolf population has continued to increase, we see increases in depredations on livestock. And until this last year, those populations have those depredations on livestock have continued to increase.
We have a graphic, I believe, that shows the depredations dropping significantly this year.
Well, this year, the depredations through the end of August are almost 50% lower than they were in the prior year. And we would attribute that to our management, an effective hunting season that helped reduce wolf numbers in those conflict areas, and the way we've worked with Wildlife Service to aggressively control chronically depredating wolf packs.
Wildlife Service being the old animal damage control, the arm of the federal government, yes, that does kill wolves when they're considered to be a nuisance or harassing. Yes. So maybe the problem has been ameliorated and you don't need another hunting season if depredations are down that much.
Well, I don't think so at all. We've seen a very steady trend of wolf population increase through reproduction. And wolf populations have increased 12 to 20% per year. Last year, with our hunting season, when the removal of an extra 188 wolves, we essentially stabilized the population so that at the end of 2009, we had about the same number of wolves as we had at the end of 2008.
What about
in absence of a hunting season, we will see wolves increase steadily.
What about this idea from Mike Clark that I mentioned in the Greater Yellowstone Coalition? Okay, keep it at this number right now, keep a hunting season, keep it stabilized, keep it out of the courtroom.
We've already suffered tremendous losses and impacts from wolves. You know, to the livestock community, we spend an awful lot of money and resources controlling wolves that are causing great impact to individual producers. And our core elk populations have suffered because of the present number of wolves. We would like to get in and manage effectively, just the way we've demonstrated we could manage all of the other wildlife species in the state.
Let me put up a graphic before we go to the phone calls, and let's just take a look at what the results of this wolf ruling will be, some of them. So we go and we go back to the previous situation. Wolves north of I-90 highway are reclassified as endangered, fully endangered. Mm-hmm. Wolves south of I-90 are reclassified as experimental and non-essential, which means that other measures can be taken to control them. Fish and Game continues as the lead agency for management. That's a little bit of question on that one, but we talk about that. There is no formal hunting season, and wolves can be killed in self-defense or the defense of others. Do you think Fish and Game will continue as the lead agency? Governor Otter has sent a letter kind of setting he says it's not a line in the sand, but an October 7th date to hear back from the Department of Interior as to whether we can develop a new memorandum of understanding. And if that doesn't happen, he said that Fish and Game will, at the very least, not monitor wolves anymore.
Marcia, there's a high frustration. Governor has it, I have it, and there's an urgency. We have 10 units in trouble. When we survey, we're 4 or 5 years behind. Hunters are alarmed. We're in trouble. So we were going to the Fish and Wildlife Service and saying, we want to get to work right now, get this done. We want more flexibility in taking these areas where elk are really going downhill, and recognize we're a user fee outfit. We are supported by sportsman dollars. We don't get tax money, or state tax money. And the commission has said, hey, we don't want to use sportsman dollars there. If it's a federal species, we need federal dollars, and we need some certainty. We need some certainty when we get into enforcement, depredation. We haven't had that. And the first part on flexibility, we'd like to see a hunting season. We had a very orderly hunting season, so we want those discussions. But the governor of the other states, and I could give you those letters, they did the same thing. They got no response back from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Secretary. So we're saying, this is important, it's urgent, we need a reply, let's get to work on it.
So you think Fish and Game may just drop management altogether?
The commission hopes not, but if we're not going to get any cooperation, and we don't have enough sportsman dollars to do it.
You had $500,000 come in from last year's wolf hunt, right?
Well, we don't have that now. We had $450,000. That's gone now. We get it from selling tags as legislation providing recreational, because we don't have a season. And we get $600,000.
But you still have it from the last season, right?
Well, we've used it up probably. But we had $600,000 we get from federal government. We're trying to get these elaborate interactions, the surveys, the elk counts, the collaring, and wolves aren't paying. The federal government's not. It's an unfunded mandate, period.
Quick question. You mentioned 10 zones in trouble. Your latest report, at least on female elk, shows that 10 of your 29 zones are actually above your management objectives for female elk. 13 zones are within your management objectives, and only 6 are below.
We had 10 units out of those 4 zones, or 6 below.
Right,
6 zones
but still, that's pretty good. 10 of 20, 23 of your 29 zones are above management.
We sampled 5. It takes a tremendous amount of work to put collars and sample. Some of those 10 zones that have higher wolf populations, we don't know. But we're going to listen to hunters and try to get some hunter surveys. But we do have 19 that have moderate to low wolf populations, and those elk are doing it. But we don't want it to keep on spreading, because it's spreading to a lot of different areas.
And there's more to that story, because although we've been able to maintain elk populations within objectives, it's come at great cost. We've had to reduce hunting opportunity, reduce antlerless elk permits in order to keep those populations within the range of objectives. So there has been a great loss of hunting opportunity to keep them there.
Loss to the hunters and economies.
Okay, our phone calls are now screened. Let's take them. Levon in Lewiston. Levon, go ahead, please.
I just wondered if our elk and wolf population was to get out of control, I just wondered how long it would be until our deer and elk population disappeared.
If the wolf population got out of control, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, how long would it be in your area before deer and elk might disappear?
Well, just in Idaho in general.
Okay, thank you so much, Levon.
We don't want to see that happen, obviously. Wolves are dependent on deer and elk. They will take other species as well. Right now, our research demonstrates that elk are taking it the hardest. At some point, when they get driven to lower densities, wolves will start to prey on other species more heavily, including moose and deer.
Can't the wolves just move someplace else, move on, and then the elk can rebound? And we have this idea of balance that comes back into the system?
Well, we've continued to see the expanding of wolves throughout the state over the last 15 years, to the point now where most of the suitable habitat, meaning availability of prey and suitable habitat, has been occupied by wolves. And so at some point, yes, if the available food supply declines, the wolf population will disperse further and it will decline as well. But at the point that will happen, we will be very, very low in total elk and deer numbers, and that's just not socially acceptable.
And you're also going to see more wolves get in trouble. When I was on last time, we had only maybe 10 chronic depredating packs. Now over a third of them are getting in trouble.
Except for your depredations are down.
Yeah, but I'm saying that hopefully this year, but more get in trouble as they disperse. But going back, our department's lost $3 million in revenue the last 2 years from non-resident hunters not coming to Idaho. And we did a survey and we asked why. Wolves were the number one. It's affecting our department. Now, how's our department going? We had a 6% increase in fishing licenses. I wish I could talk about the records. Steelhead runs, the 20,000 salmon, our free fishing waters, our mentoring, our 22,000 project.
You are.
We manage 70 hunted species, 500 other game species. We have 229 species of concern. We're managing them, and we do a good job. But wolves and grizzly bear, we're not allowed to manage.
Let's talk to Frank and Haley. Frank, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, at one of the first meetings that I went to, I proposed a maybe spade and neutering these where you land, turn them loose, and then turn around.
Okay.
You want 45 more, spade and neuter those.
Okay, thank you very much. The idea of spaying and neutering wolves.
This is a proposal that comes up on occasion. Unfortunately, it's logistically very, very difficult because you have to be spaying and neutering the right wolves. So you've got to go in, you have to be able to capture them. You find the alpha male, the breeding female, spay and neuter those, let them go. It's very difficult to tell that you have the right ones in the first place. And so for managing a wild species in a wild population setting, it's just simply very, very impractical in most circumstances.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a question that several people have written in about. One person writes, the federal government, i.e. Wildlife Services, is currently formulating a plan to kill wolves, including puppies, using poison, traps, snares, etc. It was out for public comment recently. Wouldn't that do the trick in controlling wolf populations the way Idaho Department of Fish and Game believe hunting would?
We have been in consultation with USDA Wildlife Services. Presently, they are limited to controlling wolves for depredation on livestock.
Right.
In the future, we would like to be able to use Wildlife Services to help control wolves that are impacting ungulate populations where we cannot be effective enough.
It would be in addition to a hunt.
Correct.
This is wildly controversial because it involves potential gassing of inside the dens and everything, and I imagine would be automatically challenged.
Well, it's Wildlife Services, and we do authorize when we have a depredation issue. At this point, we authorize and work with the landowner their services.
For livestock.
It's a NEPA, and they're talking population control and broad stuff there's concerned. But we do have population control right in Boise with dogs and everything, and we'll see what their comments come. It's a federal action, but we do need their services taking care of problem animals.
Let's talk to Ed up in Sagal, Idaho. Ed, go ahead, please.
Yes, Director, due to past deals, would you feel comfortable recommending between 500 and 700 wolves, as Idaho once agreed to, versus the 100 to 150 that the legislature directed in 2002? And by the way, where did that 500 to 700 figure come from? With some detail, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. As you mentioned, there is this discrepancy between what the Fish and Game Commission has said it would like to see and the legislature authorized a much lower number. And again, we go back to this idea that maybe we could cap it at a certain number.
Well, Ed has legitimate concern. How gridlocked we are. There's many that are saying, hey, let's go to the 15 packs. Let's go to the deal that the defenders and everybody agreed to. But what happened in that 2002 state wolf legislative plan, it said in there that when they're creating unacceptable conflict, then they should be controlled. And recognized several years ago we did not have good information, but in 2005, depredations jumped up. Wildlife Services could not control them. So I think that's where the 500 came from, that level. But it's an interim management goal. Some commissioners say 1 year, but we're not allowed to deal with it. But I have commissioners saying, hey, let's go back to the original deal.
I don't think Ed wants to go to 150. My sense was that he wondered about the 500 number. Or you think it's the opposite?
500 is we knew depredation, but you get to the low, it's adaptive. It's even worse. I think we're going to even be more aggressive on some of those elk areas.
Okay, let's talk to Bill in Grangeville. Bill, go ahead, please. Bill?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
How have you been counting the wolves?
Great, thank you very much. How do you count the wolves? And we had somebody else who wrote in and said that there are very few collars out there anymore. So how can you count wolves without the radio collars? So how are you doing that?
We put a great deal of effort into capturing the wolves on the ground through traps. We've been augmenting our efforts with capture from helicopters in the wintertime. And what our objective is to go out and get 1 or 2 radio collars on most of the packs so that we can use radio telemetry from airplanes to locate those wolves, and then in the winter, when they're visible on the snow, we count the number of wolves in the pack.
Have you lost a lot of ones with collars, though?
Yes, collars are coming in and out of the system all the time. I mean, it's one of our keys for identifying illegal killing, as well as, tracking the animals to their dens so we can document reproduction and assess numbers statewide.
We're unfortunately rapidly running out of time. For those of you on the line, stay on the line. We will take your phone calls after this. But I have 2 questions, Director, that are kind of related to each other, and I'm going to ask you to respond to them as we close. One person says, can you tell the viewers if there's a positive side to wolf recovery? All we hear is about killing them down to 150. And again, another person writes, I'm still waiting for Cal Groen to say anything positive about wolves, except for that they must be managed, and then the person puts in parentheses, killed. Is there a positive side in your mind to wolf recovery and to wolves?
Well, there is a positive side because it's been a success story. We achieved the recovery goals. We did it. We could have declared victory, but the goalposts keep going on and on and on.
What's the positive side in your mind to wolf recovery? What does it do for the ecosystem?
Well, it puts another predator out there, another appearance, like we manage bears and lions. We have grizzly bears in the state. It was another species, but we manage those species. We have not been allowed to manage wolf species, the wolf. Why? That's the question.
Are you glad we have wolves in Idaho?
Well, I was, but I'm not sure anymore. If we can't manage them, is it affecting our elk and our hunters and our economies? I mean, the deal hasn't been followed through, and that's the problem with ESA right now. If people don't follow with their commitments, why would you need willing partners for ESA to work? And when people keep stringing it out in court, making tons of money off it through campaigns, that's an issue, and that's what we're seeing. We have not lived up to the original deal.
Well, we will continue covering this story as we have for over 15 years with other points of view as well in the future at the table. I appreciate tonight you talking about the state's response to this lawsuit. And for those of you on the phone, again, stay on the phone. The 2 individuals here have kindly agreed to take your phone calls after the show, and we'll put that on our website. I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Dialogue.